Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TCB Podcast. Today, we will talk about something that is very important in clinical research, but not always well understood: outsourcing in clinical trials. Today, most clinical trials are not done by one company. Sponsors often work with CROs and vendors to run their studies. These partnerships help bring new treatments to the patients faster. But many people working in clinical research don't really see how these partnerships start. How do companies choose their vendors? Or how do they decide which CRO to work with? To help us to understand this better, I'm very happy to welcome today's guest, Luca Curtarelli. Luca is an outsourcing expert with more than 15 years of experience in clinical research and vendor management. And during his career, he has worked closely with sponsors and CROs, helping manage partnerships and outsourcing strategies for clinical trials. Luca, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm really happy to be here with you, really.
Yeah, thanks. So to start, Luca, could you tell us maybe a little bit more about yourself? How did you start your career in clinical research, and how did you move into outsourcing and vendor management?
Okay, I'm Luca Curtarelli. I'm located in Italy, Milan. My background starts from university in pharmacology and chemistry, and then at the end of the university, I moved to the work life, and then I start my activities with several local and international CROs. I start working as CRAs, and then I move position till the last one in clinical operation where I was responsible for a small clinical operation department in a company where also a clinical pharmacology unit in Ukraine. But it was really a great experience. More or less 2010, I moved to the freelance position, and I started to work with pharma and CROs together. And then I'm moving naturally to outsourcing, working with pharma, because in Italy a lot of pharma doesn't perform internally clinical research, so they outsource project to CROs. So due to my previous experience, I moved to outsourcing department, and then in the last 15 of years, I work in 3 different pharma company as outsourcing manager. Currently, I'm working in Chiesi Farmaceutici, that is one of the biggest pharma in Italy that dedicate a lot of budget to clinical research.
Okay, Luca, that's really interesting journey, and it's give you a great perspective on how outsourcing works in the industry. So let's start with a question I believe that many people working in clinical research are curious about. So many professionals working in our industry, clinical research, they, I'm pretty sure, don't always see how outsourcing decisions are made behind the scenes. So from your experience, how do sponsors usually choose CROs or vendors for clinical trials? And also, what are the main factors they are consider when making such decisions?
So I have to make some step before explain you the process for the outsourcing selection and allocation. So it is important to understand that in my experience, but generally, pharma companies are used to work with a limited pool of vendors, which may pass a qualification process. So the pharmas used to work only with qualified vendors and CROs. The qualification process is based on different steps. So generally, the company which work with sponsor need to be economic and business solid, and of course they have to pass the qualification of services to be outsourced, and then the qualification of services is done by CleanOps, and also the vendors must be QA approved, and the qualification is generally on 2 different levels: functional and audited approved. Once the CROs is qualified, was defined as qualified, they can put on bid. okay, with other qualified vendors, okay. The selection is done on different levels. First of all, the selection must be based, and then we will talk later, on the detailed request of proposal. That is must be done by the sponsor. After that, of course, the selection factor are based on different aspects and factors that are: one, the quality of service requested and offer. So what we are going to buy or outsource. The strategy proposed by the vendors to get the final result. The cultural fit and communication, that is really important. It's the human factor that is important to create a good feeling between teams. The technology and the innovation offered by the vendors. And of course, that is really important also, is the panel of subcontractor that they are able to offer to companies to support all the ancillary aspect of the project that they must perform. And of course, last but not least, is the cost. Of course, the cost is the much important factor which drive the selection. All the others factor described before are and becomes really important when the cost of the proposal are really close. So vendors are qualified, same level of quality services. Second step is the cost, and then if the costs are similar, all the other factors, communication, strategy, and it becomes really important for the selection. Qualification and cost are the main driver for the selection.
Okay, Luca, thanks. It's really very interesting. And especially the point about how many different factors needs to be considered. And also once a vendor is selected, of course, the real work begins. And the outsourcing process itself can be quite complex.
Yeah.
So outsourcing clinical trials activity usually includes many steps, as you also just mentioned. And for example, like RFPs, feasibility assessments, budgeting, like vendor selections and other. And also like managing the vendor even during the trial execution. From your experience, where do you see the biggest inefficiencies in this process today? And maybe like the second question would be, where do things tend to slow down or become challenges?
So there are different types of outsourcing. Full, functional, that can guide the processes. But in any case, I told you before in my previous answer, the most important and time-consuming process is really the selection of the right vendors able to fit exactly what I'm looking for. So not all vendors are able to cover what the company is looking for. And the selection of the correct vendor is really difficult. This is why, as I told you before, there are two steps. Okay, we are talking about all qualified vendor, same level. So the most important things for the qualification is the definition of assumption, specification, and the creation of the correct request for proposal that will guide all the processes for the selection of the right vendors. The right vendors is not always the big one, or the most expensive one. Is exactly the one that is able to cover your activities or the activities that you are going to outsource. That it's really important. When you have made the qualification, the second step that is really important is the definition of the contractual aspect and rules that will guide all the processes and relationship between the two companies. So a definition of MSA, Master Service Agreement, is really, really important from the economics and commercial point of view. And it also, the creation of template that will be incorporated in the MSA is really, really important, because all the template will speed up the process in order to get the awarding as soon as possible. Yeah, what I can say you is not exactly a level of inefficiencies. I think that create a good team that is a mix between operational and outsourcing is the best way to try to avoid any kind of inefficiencies in the process of the selection. Operational is able to check part of the activities, the quality, the strategy, and outsourcing is able to cover all the other remaining aspect and factor related to cost, contracting, and relationship. So building a correct team for the selection of vendors is the most important things to do to avoid any kind of efficiencies or mistake. Taking consideration that the relationship between company and vendors generally is a long-term relationship. It's really, really important. And the mix of the team, operation and outsourcing is really, really important for that. This is my opinion and experience.
Okay, I do hope that a lot of companies will listen to you.
Yeah,
and will
I
make
hope because
notes.
that sometimes company underestimate the position of outsourcing manager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, Luca, it sounds like there are still so many opportunities to improve how this process can work. And I believe that naturally leads to another question, especially when we think about how quickly technology is developing. So, looking ahead, do you think that maybe technology or digital platforms could change the way sponsors and CROs connect and collaborate? And Luca, if yes, what kind of solutions do you think could help make outsourcing more efficient and more transparent?
I think that the technology can influence or speed up the process of the selection. The technology is really growing up and very fast, and probably the AI will support speeding up the process for the selection of vendors. Technology is always already present in our work. So you know that the creation of e-tools able to manage, for example, RFP, grid, and to review cost and create and build cost is really important. Now we have a lot of company perform bid processes on the web. This is really faster for the interaction and the communication and transmission of documentation. We have the possibility to perform remote meeting where all the teams from everywhere worldwide are able to be present in the same room at the same time with a low cost that compared to maybe 20 years ago, it was really impossible or really very expensive. Okay. And of course, the speeding of the communication, emails, meeting helps to meet team and try to create a relationship and feeling. I think that the technology is really, really important. But from my side, I'm really a boomer. The human factor remains really important for our job. So the position of the outsourcing is not only to check and verify cost, but is to create a relationship, help the companies to perform critical and important project together.
Okay, Luca, I completely understand you, and my point of view is the same. I also wanted to mention how you talked and how you highlighted that AI will support,
Yeah,
but AI
it will not
can't replace.
substitute,
No,
never.
it's never, because in our job we can't do it.
Yeah,
Anyway,
correct.
humans, they will be like on the top. So those are some really interesting ideas about maybe how the industry might evolve in the future.
Yeah.
And Luca, before we finish today's conversation, I would like also to ask you a couple of more like personal questions based on your experience. Over the years, many professionals learn from books, from mentors or experiences that shape their careers. Are there maybe any books about leadership, negotiation, or based on everything you have seen in the industry? What is one common mistake companies make when outsourcing clinical trials activities? Maybe what advice would you give to help to avoid such mistakes?
Delegate the outsourcing and selection of vendors to operations. That's so, as I told you before, operations are really, really important, but are only part of the team. So don't underestimate the position of outsourcing manager. So outsourcing manager is a real working position that require particular knowledge and skills. Outsourcing manager is able to understand how the costs are built and how the grid are prepared by the CROs. And of course, it's able to discover hidden costs that probably other roles are not able to do it. As also able to understand the robustness of the answer that support and the strategy, the tech strategy that support the cost in what proposal. And as I told you before, is able to build a relationship long-term, usually, with the vendors that are critical to support the project of the company. So create a good team with the expert with the expertise in outsourcing manager and clinical operation is really, really important for the company to avoid any possible mistake or inefficiencies in all the process for the selection. Take in mind that when you have selected one vendor for one project, you are giving them the key of the critical project of the company. Okay, so that and then the relationship must be strong and based on respect and mutual benefit. As I told you before, I'm a boomer. So from my side, I repeat it. From my side, human factor. It's the human factor is really, really important. And then so to work with people that is able to give you indication, support, and teach you something. It's really, really important. For knife outsourcing manager and not only knife, I can give you an indication for a book that I used in past. That is, the title is Outsourcing Clinical Development. It's written by Jane Beguley and edited by Jane E. Winter. That could be a good book that can help new and not only new outsourcing manager.
To understand the full cycle and like the right, to have got the full picture of this profession, how it should work.
I hope I was able to transmit my feeling because really I love my job. So that's why.
It's perfect.
Thank
you. Really. So Luca, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. It was really interesting to hear your perspective on how sponsors choose vendors and what challenges will still even exist in our sourcing processes, and how technologies might shape the future of collaboration between sponsors and also CROs. And thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please feel free to share the podcast with your colleagues and stay tuned for the future episodes. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Bye-bye. Take care.